Today is March 23rd, 2026. And right now, not last week, not last month, right now, the United States and Iran are locked in one of the most bizarre, dangerous, and flat-out confusing diplomatic standoffs in modern history. On one side, you have Donald Trump standing in front of reporters telling the world that Iran wants to make a deal, that talks are happening, that peace is close, that this could all be over soon. On the other side, you have Iran's foreign ministry going on state television and saying, verbatim, there is no dialogue between Tehran and Washington. Two completely opposite realities, two completely different stories. And somewhere in the gap between those two stories, the fate of the Middle East, and possibly the global economy, is hanging by a thread. So let's cut through all of it. Let's lay out exactly what Trump said, exactly what Iran said, what we actually know is true, and most importantly, what this contradiction tells us about how close we actually are to either a deal or a catastrophe. Start with Trump. Speaking to reporters on Monday, Trump laid out U.S. objectives clearly. Iran halts uranium enrichment, hands over its existing stockpiles, and reopens the Strait of Hormuz. In return, the war ends. If this happens, it's a great start for Iran to build itself back, and it's everything that we want, Trump said. He went further. Trump claimed Iran had committed not to pursue nuclear weapons or enrich uranium, agreed to hand over its existing stockpiles, and also agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. They want to make a deal. We want to make a deal too, he said, adding that he had notified Israel about the talks and that Israel would be very happy with what the U.S. has. If that were true, we'd be looking at the biggest diplomatic breakthrough of the decade. But then Iran opened its mouth. Iran's foreign ministry went on state broadcaster and said flatly, there is no dialogue between Tehran and Washington. Full stop. No negotiation, no talks, no deal in the works. And Iran didn't just deny it, they escalated simultaneously. Iranian officials warned that if the U.S. attacks Iran's power plants, Iran would retaliate against energy and water infrastructure across the entire Gulf region, including in countries hosting U.S. military bases. Iran's Defense Council also warned that any attack on Iran's coasts or islands would trigger mine laying across Gulf sea lanes, effectively blocking maritime traffic beyond the Strait of Hormuz. That is not ceasefire language. That is escalation language. That is a country saying, we are preparing to make this worse, not better. So who's telling the truth? Here's what we actually know beneath the noise. An Israeli official confirmed to Axios that U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner had been in touch with the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. A source with knowledge of the discussions said Egypt, Pakistan, and Turkey were passing messages between the U.S. and Iran, and were attempting to set up a direct call between Ghalibaf and Trump's team, so contacts exist. Back channels are open. Third-party mediators are carrying messages, but contacts are not a deal. Back channels are not commitments. And here is the kicker. Ghalibaf himself denied that any negotiations had taken place, calling U.S. claims an effort to manipulate markets and escape the quagmire in which the U.S. finds itself. Trump's explanation for the contradiction? He claimed Iran's denial was the result of miscommunication within Iranian leadership. Trump said he did not want to name the Iranian official he was speaking with because he did not want to get him killed. Let that sink in. The President of the United States is saying he's protecting the identity of an Iranian contact because naming him could get him assassinated by his own government. That is not a functioning diplomatic partner. That is a country in internal chaos. It's a leadership structure shattered by the killing of its supreme leader 3 weeks ago, with different factions sending completely different signals to different interlocutors at the same time. This is the real story underneath the he said, she said. Tehran right now is not a unified actor. The Trump administration's own messaging has been contradictory from the start. Officials have described the same conflict as major combat operations, a war already won, and a little excursion, all within 3 weeks. But Iran's contradictions run even deeper. You have a new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who has not yet consolidated power. You have hardline Revolutionary Guard commanders who want to keep fighting. You have pragmatic parliament figures quietly testing whether a deal is survivable politically. And you have a foreign ministry publicly denying everything, while back-channel envoys whisper to Egyptian and Turkish intermediaries, this is not one government speaking with one voice. This is a fractured regime trying to manage a war, a succession crisis, and a collapsing economy simultaneously. Now, what would a real deal actually require? Because Trump's stated terms sound simple. Stop enriching. Hand over stockpiles. Open Hormuz. But each of those three demands carries enormous complexity. On enrichment, Iran has spent decades and billions of dollars building a nuclear program it views as a fundamental sovereign right and national security guarantee. Abandoning enrichment entirely is not a concession. It is a surrender of national identity for the Iranian political class. Even moderate Iranian leaders cannot sell that domestically without something massive in return. On stockpiles, handing over enriched uranium to a third party requires a level of trust between Iran and the international community that simply does not exist after 3 weeks of open warfare. Who takes custody? Where does it go? What guarantees prevent the U.S. from simply resuming strikes once the stockpiles are gone? Iran watched what happened to Muammar Gaddafi after he gave up his weapons program. That lesson has never left Tehran. And on Hormuz, reopening the strait means abandoning Iran's single most powerful economic leverage card. Every day Hormuz stays closed. The pressure on Washington, Riyadh, and the Gulf states to find an off-ramp intensifies. Why would Iran give that up before getting concrete, verifiable concessions in return? The head of the International Energy Agency warned Monday that the global economy faces what he called a major threat from the war's disruption to oil and gas flows, saying the current situation was worse than the combined oil crises of 1973 and 1979, which together cost the world 10 million barrels per day. That pressure is real, it is excruciating, and it is cutting both ways. Yes, it is pushing Washington to find an exit, but it is also giving Tehran enormous leverage to extract maximum concessions before agreeing to anything. Here's the bottom line. Trump is not simply lying. Iran is not simply lying. What is actually happening is more complicated and more dangerous than a simple lie. Trump is describing back-channel contacts as a deal because he needs to, domestically, politically, economically, he needs to show the American public that the most disruptive conflict since the Gulf War is moving toward resolution. Iran's public-facing leadership is denying everything because admitting to talks with the United States in the current domestic political environment in Tehran could be politically fatal, or literally fatal. Both sides are managing their own internal audiences while simultaneously trying to find a thread of agreement that neither can publicly acknowledge. That 5-day window Trump referenced, it is real. The pressure is real. The back channels are real. But a deal is not real. Not yet. And if that window closes without progress, the next move on the military chessboard gets significantly darker. Iran has already threatened to mine Gulf sea lanes. The U.S. has already warned of strikes on Iranian power infrastructure. And both sides have domestic political constituencies that benefit from continued conflict more than from a messy, compromise-laden peace. Watch the next 48 hours carefully. Not the press conferences, not the state television denials. Watch the oil markets, watch the Strait. Watch whether Turkish and Egyptian foreign ministers start making emergency trips. That's where the real diplomacy will show itself. Not in what either side says publicly, but in what quietly moves behind the scenes. Because in this crisis, as in most crises, the truth is not being spoken out loud by anyone. It is being whispered through back channels in Cairo and Ankara, carried by envoys whose names cannot be spoken, toward a deal that neither side can yet admit they need.